Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the weekend edition. It's hard to believe, actually, that it was less than a decade ago. I was still talking to people about whether or not they'd move to the cloud. Not how, but whether or not they would. And today, the cloud is a fundamental architecture, at least a major part of it for every company. As much as we like to pack everything into that word cloud, it's actually a wide-ranging and diverse architecture. And it has grown over that decade or more. And rarely is it only one thing. In fact, we often use a term hybrid cloud to describe it. But the past few years are not only about the growth and diversity of the cloud, but they're also about a new stage of maturity and how we talk about and now how we manage a cloud architecture. So when I got the chance to have a discussion based on a pretty serious study of cloud and where we are today, I jumped at the chance. Now, fair warning, a lot of the information in the studies we get are usually from the US or North American. We don't get enough real research from a purely Canadian perspective. So this is unique. I'm going to invite our US listeners, stay with us. You might find some really good insights into this new report, which was prepared in conjunction with CDW Canada, and we'll introduce them in a minute, and IDC, a well-known and respected research group. It's called the 2024 CDW Canadian Hybrid Cloud Report. My guest today to walk through this with me is KJ Burke. He's the field CTO for hybrid infrastructure for CDW. Just a note, you don't have to write anything down. I'll post a link with the show notes as soon as this whole report becomes available. That's it. I'm going to welcome my guest. Welcome, KJ.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate you having me on the weekend show. As we were talking about earlier, enjoy listening to Hashtag Trending when I'm getting ready in the morning. And then it's nice to have sort of the longer format on the weekend. So thanks for having me. My role is field CTO for hybrid infrastructure at CDW Canada. And I helped put together the report that we're going to talk about.
It's great. So KJ, can I call you K? Could we be on a first initial basis? I'd never know with the guys with two initials. I'm just kidding you. But it's great to talk to you. You equally have a podcast, and I want to give you a chance to promote that too, because it's a really good one. You get some fascinating guests on your podcast. You just want to tell people a little bit about that, and then we'll get into what you do.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. So the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast, we interview various IT leaders and thought leaders around Canada. Sometimes we pull in from our global partnerships. We really try to talk about innovating and compelling areas of IT that maybe we hear about, but we don't actually do a deep dive. So similar to your longer format, we get about an hour and we get to ask some really interesting questions and kind of understand, where things are going at the forefront of innovation.
Let's talk about this cloud study. Why does a firm like CTW invest in, this is a big deal. This is a large sample and all this. Why do you invest in a cloud study like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that where we really found challenges is in the Canadian market. When we get these reports, they're either global reports or maybe they're US based reports, and they tend not to have a good view of kind of what's happening in Canada. So we do a couple of reports. We do the cloud report, we do a security study, also with IDC, and then we do a number of market trend reports. And really what we're trying to do is help Canadian leaders understand what their peers are doing. And it gives us a bit of an insight into what businesses are focused on, so that when I'm working with my team, we're investing in the right people and new skill sets and that. But I think it really just to encourage conversation between organizations in Canada.
And I want to point out, this is a real study. There's a lot of research. There's some good things you can learn from everything. There are a lot of studies that are really just questionnaires and marketing pieces, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this is a serious study, pretty in-depth, has a pretty large sample. How many companies did you survey?
So they did me a favor and they made it about as easy to remember as possible. There were 711. So I just thought of 7-Eleven and there it's locked in my brain frame. and we got a pretty good sample set. It was about a third C-level executives, about a third sort of a VP or director, and about a third sort of manager and frontline. So it's a pretty good subset. And then it's broken out across various industries pretty well as well.
And different sizes of organizations as well.
Yeah. And what we find is that, especially when you compare to the US market, our large enterprise tends not to be as large as some of the biggest organizations in the US. Our medium-sized enterprise has different challenges. And then startups and smaller organizations with the agility they have, again, they all sort of have different needs and they're running into different roadblocks. And so about a third were larger enterprises, about a third were medium, and about a third were smaller.
And I want to go back to the size sample because in Canada, this is a statistically relevant sample. This is good. And you've got a really good breadth to capture that. And oftentimes that's a bit of a challenge. People get asked to fill out surveys all the time. So it's getting responses is difficult. You've managed to get a pretty good survey of the cloud.
Yeah, IDC has been a really good partner, both this report, the 2024 cloud report, and the security study. We get really good engagement. And I think organizations, a lot of times they want to get their feedback in there because it helps them move the business forward and move the country forward with their peer groups.
Absolutely. We started out talking about cloud and it being a big and diverse architecture. How do CDW define cloud for the purposes of the study, at least?
Yeah, for the purpose of the study, there's a couple of terms that I think get a little confusing. We really define hybrid cloud as having things on premises, at the edge, in the public cloud, SaaS services. It's that sort of hybridity across those. And then multi-cloud as being in multiple public cloud providers at the same time. And so when we talk about hybrid multi-cloud, we're kind of talking about all of it. When we talk about hybrid cloud, really focusing in on maybe it's tools to work across the data center into the public cloud. When we talk about multi-cloud, we're talking about large public cloud providers and taking advantage of those services.
And this is really important. These things like edge, some of these other pieces are really important parts of the cloud that normally could just get lost. And I think they are critical. And I think we'll find that from part of our discussion.
Yeah. And especially when you mention the edge, that is becoming more and more important, especially as we start to look at some of the other technologies that we reference in the report, like AI and IoT.
Yeah. Now, I did my own CIO census for like over 10 years, and I might actually go back to it. I think it was an interesting thing to do. As I was approaching the new report, I was always thinking about what happened last year. Did you have any real insights that you took in from 2023 as you were preparing this?
Yeah, one of the major findings in the 2023 report was the organizations that were able to digitize their services, both for internal stakeholders, for external customers. They were the ones that were really benefiting, especially being able to offer those solutions in a digital manner throughout COVID and everybody's work from home, everybody's remote anyway. So being able to offer digital solutions was really, really powerful. And then we also saw this change last year. It was sort of the first year where we had a significant change there. And that was going away from a cloud first strategy and really organizations understanding they were going to be in a hybrid world where they were going to have things in the data center, where they were going to have things at the edge, and they were going to take advantage of public cloud. So those are two of the big things. The other thing is that we think we're insulated from the cybersecurity study a bit, but we're not. Organization security is not just a team. It's really a hat that everybody in IT has to wear. Traditional IT teams are more concerned about resiliency. They're more concerned about cybersecurity and how they can really work with their security partners.
COVID seems like it was 100 years ago now, but it really did put all of our development of our digital businesses on a fast track. And I think that that's something that really did accelerate cloud. But I think you came up with the same perspective I had. There's a new maturity, and that maturity involves understanding you might deal with a cloud provider to give you the technical part of security, but you still own the security. I think that was a big light that went on for everyone over the past year.
Yeah, and you can't outsource ownership. You can potentially outsource various parts of it, but you can never outsource that responsibility.
So going into the 2024 report, what trends have changed as this year went on?
One of the trends that really jumped out at me was as organizations are looking the next couple of years into the future, the amount of workloads and the amount of investment in the public cloud seems to have plateaued in people's estimations. And so year after year with the report, because this is the fourth year we've done it, we've seen public cloud investments and people's commitments to the public cloud going up anywhere from 5 to 8% per year. this is the first year where there's only a perception there's going to be a 1% increase in budget and workloads that go into the public cloud. So that leveling off is a very, very interesting metric, especially when we compare back to a few years.
It was a big thing for me. When I saw it on the draft of the report you shared with me, it blew me away. These public cloud providers are projecting they need to project 10, 20, 30% growth every year just to stay in the game. And for that to have plateaued I think it's going to have some big ramifications, although, and we'll talk about later, I think AI is going to pick up a big pile of the slack in their growth. But still, that was a big eye opener for me. Anything else jump out to you from the report?
One of them is really the struggle that organizations are having with managing the hybrid multi-cloud. So the lack of sort of, single pane of glass or working with consistency of services or capabilities. I mean, if you think about just a firewall as one example, running a firewall in one public cloud provider and in a second cloud provider, and then on premises and at the edge. And most organizations need 3 different skill sets to run that. They need cloud provider 1, they need cloud provider 2, and they need their on premises. And then not having that observability or that single place to go to view what's there. And then the back end challenges with compliancy, going to your compliancy team and saying, yeah, our governance and our risk plan is this, but we don't have those capabilities in this one location. And so all of a sudden, the complexity of managing that hybrid multi-cloud is significant. And the number of organizations that have that plan for and are executing against that is only about 30% of organizations. And so that becomes a really big challenge.
Tell me more about that. Only 30% of organizations?
Yeah, the struggle really comes down to, I think that they are dealing with the need to operate with the skills that they have in their legacy data centers, but translating that into the public cloud, you end up having a real difficulty finding people. And so there's a bit of a skills gap there that drives some of that. And then when you do find the right people, you're trying to lure them away from other organizations that obviously want to keep them. And if you look at something like cybersecurity, in Canada, we can't train enough people quickly enough to make up for the deficit in cybersecurity people, let alone for all of the new roles that are focused into cybersecurity and resiliency. And so we're kind of playing this game of we're trying to bail water out of the boat as quickly as we can. The complexity becomes a challenge for organizations. Medium-sized organizations are really struggling with adoption of public cloud services because they just don't have the people. They have the complexity that larger organizations have, but they just don't have the people that they can put against that problem. The skills gap is real, and the fight for talent is really, really difficult to win for organizations.
So there's a couple of things that have come out of this that really blow my mind, or they at least start me thinking. One of them that I can't quite reconcile in my own world is, on one hand, Canada is a real hybrid cloud nation. I mean, I think we are probably, if we lead in anything, it's the fact that we're pretty big in hybrid cloud. And yet we're starved for resources. And so maintaining the knowledge of 1, 2, 3 different clouds, I don't know how people keep up with that. First of all, that's the first part. Have you any indications from this report or any of the talks you've had with people of how they're keeping up with that?
Yeah. So the organizations that are able to succeed or at least be more agile and overcome some of these challenges are really focusing in on automation tooling, orchestration tooling, and then consistency, where you can build that consistency across your multiple public cloud providers in your data center at the edge, being able to leverage maybe some of the traditional technologies that you would use in the data center, but spreading those across your hybrid multi-cloud so that you can have a skill set to manage, say, your firewall or your storage platform or your data fabric. That becomes really, really important. But then again, building, really sort of taking that cloud operations model, a lot of which the benefit is your ability to automate, your ability to script, your ability to orchestrate, and leveraging tools that can work across the hybrid multi-cloud. Organizations that are succeeding are investing not necessarily in having 3 different people that can manage different firewalls, depending upon where they are. They're really succeeding because they're investing in a person that is able to work with automation tools to deploy those services across those three different environments using orchestration and automation tooling.
Yeah, and I think one of the findings, and I think it was there in the plateauing of where we're going with public cloud, I think we are getting to a new maturity in terms of how we manage the financial aspects of public cloud. I think one thing I've heard from CIOs, I've heard it for years, so I think the more astute knew it all along. You're not going to save money going to the cloud. That's not the issue. The issue is being able to be more flexible, to be more responsive, to have a better security infrastructure, whatever it is, it's not saving money. But we're now starting to see, and I think you had references to it in your survey, the idea of financial management being something that we're really starting to see, and it's being recognized as a skill in managing cloud.
Yeah, starting with last year, FinOps was not really a term that we were throwing around prior to 2023. At least I'm more on the technical side, so it wasn't something I was really focused on, but absolutely, it's become a key metric. As your cloud spend has grown, organizations want to make sure they're getting the most out of the dollars they're spending. And so as that line item on the budget has continued to increase, it's gotten more scrutiny. There still aren't a lot of organizations that have a person that's identified as not even the FinOps person, but even that wears the hat of FinOps. And so again, that's an area where organizations need to start identifying somebody that can sort of own that part of the conversation, that can own tracking that number, that can explain that number to the business. Because at a high enough level, they're just looking at a line item on your budget and saying, wow, that line item appears to be much larger. What value are we getting out of that?
And this management of the cloud expense is phenomenal. And I think if anybody's out there listening and they haven't heard of FinOps, you can go to finops.org. And a lot of the stuff is available for free. You can see it and start to really appreciate what it is. You always have one story that tells you when the lights go on this. I was doing a speaking tour with Microsoft. I was working with somebody else. I won't name them at this point, but their whole area was license management. And the two of us worked together how you could take like 70% of your costs out by managing them properly from one case study. Now, I'm saying everything's like that, but this was a real case study. I walked through it with these experts and my eyes just went, my chin dropped, first of all, and said, wait a minute, we're leaving all of this on the floor. And that's because there's technical management. I think we accept security management. We're just getting to financial management.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something really important, and we didn't necessarily go to the cloud to save money, although that was one of the promises. It really is around agility, where organizations are struggling to bring some of those legacy workloads, some of those traditionally built systems due to cost constraints. That's where we really have to look at how do we replatform those to take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud. There are some things that we can do from a technical perspective, but at the end of the day, sometimes contract negotiation, sometimes just having better visibility tools. We've all heard sort of the anecdotal stories of, well, we spun this up on a Friday and we let it run over the weekend because we forgot to shut it off. And we came back and our subscription is now in the 5 or 6 figures. And all of a sudden I've got my CFO calling me saying, hey, what happened to this small little POC that you were doing that now is showing up as part of the budget? I think having visibility, and it's kind of similar to what we were talking about from a management and orchestration. It's having those dashboards and those reports, and then identifying somebody who's going to be responsible for it. If we don't have somebody responsible for it, then that becomes a challenge. And organizations listening to this, hopefully they know who their cloud cost person is. If they don't, then start thinking about how do we create somebody and identify somebody that could be, accountable for that.
Yeah. And you and I both have spent parallel times in mining, doing some work with mining companies. We are always watching the cost of infrastructure in IT, not necessarily OT, but in IT. And I don't know, I'm sure you did the same thing, but I was walking around trying to get use-based costing done for almost a decade with minimal results. And then overnight, the cloud gives us user-based costing. Boof. You ran that server all weekend. We know who you are. We know what it costs. An interesting world that we got ourselves into.
Yeah. I think the most amazing story I've run into, sort of not being as active in mining, obviously not working for a mining company anymore, was an organization that had tied their cybersecurity budget to their safety and health budget. And by showing that whether it was IT/OT security or whether it was PLCs and SCADA systems, that by showing that a cybersecurity breach could actually be a safety and health incident as well, to the struggles that you and I went through where we just never had enough budget, that to me was pretty ingenious and also maybe pretty smart.
That's really smart. It's so funny. You can walk around with a group, and I'm not going to criticize engineers in mining. I had great working relationship with them, but I'm going to say they weren't always the best at understanding IT security or caring about it. But you know something? The one day I walked up to the plant and I didn't have my hard hat on, right? What does the head of the plant come to me and say? We need to talk to you about safety. I think that's brilliant. And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us. And maybe that's something people can reflect on when they're reading through the study and start to say, how can I articulate these findings and how can I articulate this knowledge in terms of the things that the business really cares about? There's a good insight in there. You learn something from everything. That's a good one.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty ingenious. I like a lot of what we're trying to do with the study here in the cloud report is to, in part, help educate executives and organizations of what their peer group is doing, but also helping sort of the frontline workers understand what are some of the trends, what are some of the skills, what are some of the things that maybe my organization isn't doing, but they should be doing. So I enjoy these types of conversations because it helps us spread the word through all different layers of the organization.
Okay, we talked about some of the insights from this report, but we didn't say those two initials. I make a joke about this. People are going to get tired of it, but we get our podcast licenses lifted if we don't say the initials AI at least once in a broadcast. So what does the study say regarding AI?
Yeah, we've done a couple of other surveys around AI, and it's definitely one of those topics that comes up. Really, most organizations have plans to take advantage of generative AI. We're still finding that computer vision, traditional AI is also growing in investment, but generative AI is one where most organizations are looking at investing over the next couple of years. Not many organizations have a good way of gauging the impact of those AI services. Specifically, 55% of organizations currently have AI and generative AI projects. But there's a potential for them to fall into the same trap IoT has had. And that is that 95% of organizations have IoT projects or IoT deployed that they're looking to get value out of, but only 35% of organizations have identified that they've gotten a return on that investment from IoT. I think with AI, we're going to run the same type of risk where we're taking actions, but are we measuring and are we getting value out of the actions? And does our management understand the value that we're going to get out of those AI tools? So there's a lot of interest in generative AI. There's a lot of projects that are going to be spun up over the next couple of years. I think one of the things we need to do as the technical people or the teams that are going to be leading those projects is really focus on developing good ways of measuring the value of those projects.
You make an interesting point, and that was another piece that leapt out to me in the survey was how many people were actually engaged in IoT projects right now. And I don't know if it's a lesson that we just never learn or if it's just the way things have to go. One is, you said that only 35% of them claim they're getting any sort of return from these IoT projects, but it's a much higher number of people who are now doing IoT projects. It wasn't too long ago where nobody cared about IoT. When we do this thing, you could tie a pork chop around my neck and a dog wouldn't play with me if I was talking about IoT. It was just something nobody wanted. And that's grown amazingly. And I disagree with you a little bit. I think that 35% number is a lot higher than it was. I think it's grown. I don't know. I don't know how much more growth we're going to get in there. But how do we avoid the same thing happening with AI? And that is that we get to the point where everybody's got projects. 55% of people got projects, and there probably will be more, but they don't know if they're getting the value. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're having conversations with organizations. It's around, what are you really trying to deliver? And if we looked at projects we delivered in the past, we'd have a proof of concept. We say, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. And then we would build it on a small scale. And then we would try to show what we thought it was going to do. I think we've gotten savvier with technology. And I think that we benefit from the fact that most people have heard of AI at this point. If you haven't heard of AI and you're in IT, like just sit in on one of our meetings or podcasts. And then we sort of said, okay, well, let's be a little bit more mature and let's look at a proof of value. And we said, okay, well, what is the business return that we're expecting of this? What are the dollars that we're going to either bring in from our customers, or how are we going to measure this with a dollar figure? With AI, because we're really talking about how can we make people more effective, we really want to measure against the productivity gains that we see. And so if we take a task that's pretty arduous and we create an AI agent, and something that used to take somebody 4 hours now takes 30 seconds, but it's something that affects 20% of my people, then there's really good return on productivity. It might not necessarily show up in a direct way on your bottom line. So a proof of value might not show that dollar figure, but the fact that you've taken a commoditized task and you've made your teams that much more effective in a repeatable way. I think with AI, it's really saying, okay, well, how can we take some of these commoditized workloads? How can we take some of these really, really arduous tasks and then take that workload off of our people? I had a conversation not too long ago with a gentleman that worked with one of the healthcare providers, and where he was talking about AI. One of the fears that everybody has is AI sort of replacing them in their job. He was making the point that the goal is to reduce staff in healthcare. And I said, well, wait a second. Are we really trying to reduce staff? As we went through the conversation, what really came in is that we just want to help nurses be able to support more hospital beds in a hospital. We want to help doctors spend more time with their patients as opposed to transcribing notes and things like that. What is the productivity? How do we outline success with that productivity boost and then measuring against that, as opposed to measuring against a dollar value that we thought we were going to generate?
And I think one of the things that we can do, and this has been my soapbox in AI, is we have an opportunity over the next 18 months to do something we didn't do with IoT. And that's define how we measure value and go after that. And you have the ability to do that with some relatively small projects. I use an example that just always impressed me, and that was a healthcare organization in Alberta. And they went and they said, one of the biggest problems we have is getting appointments set up and getting meetings set up and getting all of these things. And they went through and using pre-Gen AI techniques, were able to automate a great deal of that. They saved a lot of people, but they didn't necessarily get rid of those people, because healthcare is one of those places where there's just constant demand. There's always something to do. Rather than fearing this, we could be looking at it and saying, how can I get rid of some of the junk that I do so I make myself more effective in the things that I really should be doing? And if we went into the next 2 years with that attitude, measure well and account for it, but look at the things that could make you more effective, I think we do well.
And what are the things that you have to do that you really don't enjoy doing, but it's part of the job? And so again, as a healthcare example, I was talking to a clinical psychologist, and she was saying that she takes all of her notations, all of her notes in clinical notation, and then she has to transcribe that. And she spends hours taking those notes and then transcribing them into something that their patients won't be anxious about reading, because we start to read technical terms, especially when it's about our health or our mental health, and we immediately jump to negative meanings for some of the words. And so that right there, if she can save 7-8 hours a week, is what she was proposing she spends writing that. Maybe it takes her a half hour because she does the transcription, but then she proofreads. That's value. And she's able to take on more patients. She's able to help more people, which is why she said she got into psychology to begin with. And so I think that's really important, is sometimes it's the things that you have to do all the time that are really not enjoyable. Well, let's start with those and go from there.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this fear that people have, AI is going to take my job. I'm twisting what some Canadian CEO had said to me, but I think it's true. AI is not taking your job. Somebody who uses AI better than you do is going to take your job. Oh.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation the other day on the podcast where I was talking about how when I grew up, they didn't let us use calculators to do mathematics in the classroom until we got to calculus, and obviously we're doing something quite a bit more complex. You're going to have kids coming into school that are learning AI tooling as part of the workflow that they use to just be more effective and better use the information that's at their fingertips. just like there is a generation that didn't grow up with Google and the accessibility of information on the internet as readily as the people a year older than them. So yeah, it's this continuation of new tools and new capabilities. But there are kids in school today that are learning to use things like ChatGPT in their regular day-to-day workflow.
You can't hold it back. I was talking to a friend of mine in the university program we were working on, and he said that the university is, they just don't know how to manage AI with students. My take to them, and what I said to them is, stop trying. You're not going to win. Just don't try to win things you're never going to win. Because when those kids get out, if they want to be employed, their ability to use AI, particularly in things like security, particularly in things like data management, this is going to be a gift to them. And the fact that they've got a good university or college education, but they also know how to use AI, they're going to be brought in and they're going to get really good opportunities, I think. That's just my opinion, but it is my opinion.
I think you're right on to something there. And you bring up an interesting thing that also came up in the CLUD report, and that was around data management. Earlier you kind of asked, like, what are some of the barriers? It's funny because data management, AI tools for data management specifically, may actually be part of the solution to our data management challenges that we have, that we need to get through before we can really roll out a lot of the AI tooling that we want to do. And so data management is definitely one of those areas that you go back a year or two, it wasn't as important, but it really shows in the report this year that organizations are starting to really dig into data management, governance, and the framework for data management, et cetera.
Yeah. And let's talk about the two things, but data governance, there's a lot in the report. Is there any insights that you came up with a data governance here?
Yeah, specifically in the report regarding data management, it's interesting that there were, when you look at what organizations are focused in on, the three most important things around data management is security, privacy of data, and then the quality of data, and actually in that order. So organizations are more concerned about the access to data and the unauthorized access to that data than even the quality of that data. And so, resiliency and obviously cybersecurity, but then to back up and really start to evaluate a lot of the conversations that we're having with customers is around creating the data governance plans to create the rules that you're going to deal with data. And so that really is a starting point and a roadblock for a lot of organizations. From a privacy perspective, just had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman from the federal government on the podcast around data privacy. And data privacy, depending upon what type of organization that you're in, can vary significantly. If you're with the federal government, okay, what is the federal government using that data for? How are they securing it? Yeah. So, and then the interesting thing is the third is the quality. So it comes down to securing the data. It comes down to guaranteeing the privacy of the data, identifying risky data, but then also the quality of the data. And I keep hearing the analogy that data is the new oil. And as you and I were talking the other day, data as a new oil, yes, but refining that data into, say, gasoline, to follow that analogy, makes it even that much more valuable and that much more potent. And so, yeah, so I think what really came out of the report was securing your data, the privacy around that data, and ensuring that you have the right compliancy, and then investing in improving the quality of the data.
Yeah. And I'm going to say something that might be heresy here, but that I think that your report's got it right. First of all, security and privacy are the absolute two foundations. The quality of data, I'm going to say something might upset people. You're never going to get there. You're always going to be whining about the quality of your data. Get over it. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But the one that's missing is breaking down the silos. And I think that's in governance. If you don't break down the silos, you will get less optimal results than anybody else. AI is going to give us a great ability to look at unstructured data, to be able to, for organizations that can't afford their own data scientists. And I'm not saying it will replace data scientists in big organizations. It'll augment them. But the stuff you can do with the analysis of data is phenomenal, but only if you can break across silos. And so that's the other piece. But the data quality, and this is just the world according to Jim, you get data quality when you use the data. And that's when people start using it, they'll start making sure it's got good quality. Data quality is a theoretical issue. It's just one of those things that's always going to defeat you. But if you start using it, and I've seen this, and I don't know if you've seen the same thing, when people start having to use the data, they start asking about, how is this put together? Is this quality? Is this right? They'll ask those questions in real time. And when your senior executives are asking, how do I know this is true? You'll find out a way, if you're ambitious or want to keep your job, you'll find a way to make sure that that data is accurate. That's my theory, at least.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good call out. I think what ends up happening is a lot of organizations, and I think this aligns with what you're saying, is they've stockpiled a lot of this data and it really hasn't been curated. So they really haven't spent a lot of time, and they're going to run some initial tests, and they're going to take that data and they're going to see what insights they can get out of it. They're going to ask it questions. They're going to interrogate it. And then where they're going to find out, to your point, that we're really not getting the answers that we want. A digital assistant that will answer questions about CDW. And we'll actually go and ask her, what does CDW stand for? And she'll get it wrong every single time, because CDW at this point doesn't stand for anything. It used to stand for Computer Discount Warehouse, but there's so much bad information, even on our own website, that she comes back and she says it stands for Computer Discount Warehouse. And so, yeah, people are going to get answers that they weren't expecting. They're getting answers they didn't want. And then, to your point, I agree. Then they're going to start to refine that data. They're going to really start to spend time with it. And that just makes it more important that it's secure, because the more time you put into it, the more the value and that intellectual property that you're building within that data. If somebody then comes and exfiltrates that data set, you've just lost not only the data, but the work you put in to refine the data. So yeah, I think organizations are going to be a little bit disappointed with some of their initial answers that they get when they seek insights out of the data. But I agree with you. The more time they spend, the more potential that they see there, the more value they're going to get out of it. But it is a maturity thing. It's not a binary, it's bad or it's good. It's 5% better than it was before we went through this cleanup activity. It's never probably going to be exactly what you want.
And if I was going to urge people, I would urge them, start small now. We've learned enough to not try and eat the entire elephant, one bite at a time is how it works. What would be your big advice? Peel back and look at the whole study, the things that you got. What are the key things that you've taken away, and what's your advice to people from what you've learned from the study?
Yeah. So when we look at the cloud report, there's sort of 6 key things. I'm just going to go to my notes because I want to make sure that I don't get them wrong.
Yep.
So, really around the digital infrastructure, investing on how can we continue to digitize? How can we continue to really provide the agility? And how can IT continue to support the business's need to grow, the organization's need to innovate, and where that sort of public cloud investment appears to be leveling off, the uptick in private cloud. So people want the value and the cloud operating model, but they also want to be able to take advantage of that in either an as a service or as a private cloud offering. So I think from a digital infrastructure, that's definitely one of the key takeaways. From a hybrid multi-cloud perspective, it really is that we are going to have things in the data center. We are going to have more things at the edge. We are going to continue to leverage public clouds. We're probably going to leverage multiple public clouds for that best of breed opportunities with different tooling that's being created. And we're going to leverage SaaS services. So let's make decisions as IT professionals, as IT leaders. Let's set the path that's going to be what we're doing. And then let's support it with better management tools. So we look at multi-cloud management, create better observability across those environments, understand that there's a consumerization of IT, and AI. We can all go to various websites. We can try it out for ourselves. AI is a little bit different in that a lot of the innovation is coming from the frontline workers. So leaders need to look at their frontline workers. They need to look at the arduous or the time consuming activities that we can automate with AI agents and things like that. Measuring those on the productivity that we're saving with AI, leverage that excitement that our frontline people have about AI. Data management, build a framework, start with that. Just start with, what do we do with risky data? How do I identify risky data? How do I mitigate that risky data? How do I educate my users not to store risky data in SharePoint or something, or unstructured data stores? And then with IoT, focus on like better measurement of how IoT can drive success with the business. So if we're doing a business transformation project and we can support that with smart offices or smart cities or smart retail, and then looking at metrics that we can really see the value of it rather than just the bottom line dollar impact, because sometimes there's a secondary impact. I think we talked about that a little bit of data management as a key part. And there's all sorts of breakdowns of different industry, different sizes of organizations. I mean, you mentioned data silos. That's another big one. People have built up in the public cloud, and now all of a sudden that's just another silo of data. I think the full report, I just had it open. There's also some good summaries. We'll be doing some road shows, bringing it in front of our customers and explaining some of that, and then offering the ability to ask questions.
It's an enormous topic. Hopefully we've given people a bit of an insight into it, and distilling it down is hard because, as we've said, cloud's no longer a thing that you buy. It's an architecture, and that takes time to absorb and affects all the components of the business. I thank you so much for joining me on the podcast on this.
Really appreciate it, Jim. Thanks for joining us the other day as well. That was it was a unique opportunity. It's been very cool.
We have to do this again. And that's our show for the weekend. I want to thank our guest, KJ Burke, Field CTO for CDW. I want you to check out his podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can actually see that. And you can, if you're not tired of me, you can hear me doing one of the podcasts over on his podcast as well. A reminder, we will post a link to the survey when it's available, or we'll do an announcement, so watch for it. You'll see it either on one of our daily stories or on one of our weekend stories as soon as it becomes available. Any final words from you, KJ?
No, I just really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Please check out the 2024 CDW Canada Cloud Report. And thanks again, Jim. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks you. And thanks to our listeners for spending part of their weekend with us. I'll be back with more tech news on Monday morning for #Trending. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a wonderful weekend.